In this video, we're going to go over making the detail page of objects in our admin have more detail and look a little better and even function better. In order to do that, I had to add a couple of fields to our models and add a model to better show off some of this functionality. If we look at our model, you'll see we have our document, and I've added public, which is a Boolean field. I've added user, which is a foreign key field. We've also added a category model that has a name and a many-to-many field to our document object. These are all very common relationships that will exist in many applications, so we can show the different functionality of the admin based on these fields. Also, if we look in our admin page, you see I just added the category page to it, and it looks just like it did in the last video for our document admin. So with that, let's go ahead and look at our admin in the browser. You'll see we have our documents. Click on the categories field. We can add a new category, but we also have this multi-select box for our document. Let's go ahead and add a new category of category 1, select a couple of documents, and go ahead and save it. You'll see we have category object because we have not done a string or Unicode method in that object. We go into it, you'll see that we have category 1 for the name, and we have the 2 documents selected in that multi-select box. Unfortunately, that multi-select box can be kind of a pain in the rear end whenever you get a lot of objects in there and you're trying to hold control and click and then scroll down, hold control and click, and it can be a little bit unwieldy. Fortunately, Django offers some helpful widgets that we can use in this case. If we'll open up our admin page, we'll go down to our category admin. We can do filter vertical equals, and then we'll give it the field that we want to filter vertical. This is a property that we set on our admin, and we just pass it in a tuple of the fields that we're going to use. A lot of the properties that we're going to use in this video and in the next are going to be properties that we set with a tuple of the field name. So if we'll jump back into our browser and refresh, you can see we have a vertical list available to us, where on the top we select the available documents, click a down button, and it goes into the chosen documents, which is going to be saved with our model. This makes it easier to deal with many-to-many tables. I don't personally like the vertical box, but there have been instances where it's good. Instead, I like to use the filter horizontal property in the admin. So if we'll set that and look in our browser, you can see we have the 2 available next to each other. I like the way this looks a little better, and it makes a little more sense when using it. So that's really it for our categories and doing a many-to-many field. Since we only have 2 fields in here, we're going to go ahead and leave our category field and go over to our documents. And in this case, we have this jumbled up mess here. If you'll notice, we have our title, we have our file, we have our public Boolean, and then for our foreign key, we have a drop down for all of our users in our database so that we can select which one we want to use. The first thing to get started with is, let's say that we want to do everything in our model except for one specific field. In our document admin, we'll do a property called exclude, and we'll pass it in a tuple of the field that we want to exclude. In this case, we want it to be title. If we refresh that in our browser, the title disappears. It's also important to note that if we go back to our root and then try to add a new document, title isn't available for us to add. So if you add anything to exclude, realize that you're not going to be able to either edit it or add it to that object. But let's say we want to do the inverse of that. We only want to include a single field in our admin. We'll just change exclude to fields so that the tuple is registered for the only field in this case that we want to use of title. In this case, it's the only field that's going to show up in details and in our ad. In this case, let's go ahead and define the other fields. And it can also take multiple fields. As you can see here, we have title and user. And when we refresh, we have our drop down again. Unfortunately, this drop down, if you have 10,000 users, is going to take a little bit to populate, because on the back end, it's going to request all 10,000 users, put them in an iterative list, and pop them to this page, and it's going to make your admin incredibly slow, especially if you have several fields with a lot of data and they all have drop downs. So a way to actually solve that is if we'll do a raw ID fields property and pass it a tuple with our user in it, then what it's going to do is it's going to create a text box Then we just have the ID of the user that we want associated with this object. And we click the little magnifying glass next to the text field to get a pop-up for us to find what user to actually select. This keeps our pages really snappy in case there's a lot of data. Next thing that we're going to look at is the read-only field. This can be really useful, especially for slug data, when you don't want anyone to be able to change it or be able to add anything manually with that field. So we'll do read-only property, pass it a tuple. In this case, we're going to use title as an example. And then when we refresh the page, you'll see we have title. It's unable to be edited, and it has just the text that was there previously. If we go back to our root and try to add a document, you can see title is blanked out, so we can't actually add a new object with a title. Unfortunately, you can notice that we have all the fields that we can actually do something with at the top, and the title, which is read-only, is at the bottom. This is because of how the admin deals with setting widgets and doing things dynamically, which is how this page is being generated. However, there's a really cool feature in the Django admin called field sets, where you can actually define what fields you want to show up and in what sections you want them to show up. So let's go ahead and look at how to do that. We're going to have a field sets property, and we're going to pass it a tuple. And it's going to be a tuple full of tuples and dictionaries. And let's go ahead and see what that looks like. For our first section, we're going to have none as the title, so it doesn't have a title for that section, and you'll see what that looks like here in a minute. And then we're going to pass it a dictionary where the first key is fields. And we're going to use a tuple of the fields that we want to actually show up. In this case, we just want the title field to show up. The next tuple that we're going to do is going to have the name file, and it's going to have the fields of file in it so that only the file field shows up in this section. At this point, we'd have two distinctive sections in our admin page to see, hey, this one's the title of the area, and this part is where you want to upload your data. The third tuple we want to do is the permissions section. At least that's what we're naming it. In this case, we're going to do the fields of public and user, because this is where we're going to set the permissions of who can actually do anything with it, whether it's public or not. Permissions is just an arbitrary name that I gave it, much like field and using none. So with that in place, let's go ahead and look at this in our browser. And you can see we have three distinctive sections. We have our title section, which does not have a title like our next two sections, where we have file, and it's the file field for us to use, and permissions section, where you have the permissions title, you have the public boolean, and the user field, which is the raw ID field that we set earlier. So this is a really good way to be descriptive about what you want included on this page and sectioning things off to be more coherent in what you're doing. I know I've messed with models that have about 30 to 40 different fields in them, and it can get kind of unwieldy trying to figure out what's what, and organizing them using this can make life a lot easier and allow you to do your job a lot quicker by taking that extra 5 minutes to build out these field sets. You can also do a little bit of extra stuff with these field sets by adding a classes key to the dictionary that we use. In this case, we're going to do a class of collapse, so that way when we open it up in our browser, that section is actually collapsed for us, and we can just click on the show to expand and hide to collapse it back. So that way you have a section of data that's either you don't use much or you don't want anyone to see, it's old, it's deprecated, but you haven't taken the time to remove it, you can just go ahead and hide it and it won't even be shown. And then there's other reasons you might want to hide it as well. So with that, we're just going to go ahead and remove the classes. There are a few others that you can use. I recommend checking out the docs for them. And then this keeps it really simple, and we keep our admin page for our document admin for the details fairly clean. As a recap, we've used the exclude property, which excludes fields, the fields property, which defines explicitly what fields you want to show up. We've used the raw ID fields, so that you can have relationships and set just the ID instead of having a giant drop down full of data and taking a long time for it to potentially load. We also have the read-only field so that you can have something like a slug that no one can actually edit or create for you whenever you create a new object through the admin. And then finally, we have the field sets that we've gone over, which allows you to section off parts of your admin in an easy, understandable way. So with that, please join us for the next video where we go over how to work with the list area of our admin for specific objects, making it easier for you to navigate through the objects that you need.